Hello everybody, Micah here. It's been such a long time. I'm so happy to speak with you again. I took a little break for some personal reasons, but I'm back now with a video, and this video took me quite a while to put together. But it should be very helpful to all of our new players, because today we're going to be looking at some of the common indicators that you're going to see very often in a variety of different battles, and we're going to talk about how you should handle them. Now, I should say, this is just a primer. The rule for a lot of these mechanics can change between fights, but what I'm going to be covering for the most part is how you should handle them by default, and then you can just adjust as needed. And I know that sounds a little bit odd, but most of these mechanics have basically the same rules, with the differences being an anomaly, which is why they also have basic ways of handling them. But we're just going to jump right in because there is a lot to cover. So we're going to start off with the most basic of basics and say anything orange is bad. Whenever you see orange or red, depending on the color settings of your monitor or TV, you're going to want to get out of the way. Now, not all mechanic indicators are orange, but orange always will mean bad and can be coupled with or an indicator of any mechanic. So get out of the way. Puddles are basically anything on the floor, and they can take a whole lot of forms, from this, to this, to even this. They are sometimes a mechanic in and of themselves, or left behind by other mechanics. They can last the entire fight, or appear for only a few seconds. What happens when you step into a puddle will also vary by fight, and sometimes, on the very rare occasion, you're going to need to actually stand in a puddle to take reduced damage or even survive. But the way you want to handle a puddle, by default, if you just never seen that puddle before, is by avoiding it, because the majority of puddles are going to do damage, kill you, or place a debuff on you. And if you're a tank, it's very important that you move enemies away from puddles, because some jobs have abilities that require players to be in a certain position. So holding them in or near a puddle, unless you have absolutely no other choice, is almost always a no-no. If the puddles appear in a pattern and eventually cover the entire arena and leave you scrambling to find a safe place to stand, it also means that they're going to explode or cause damage in that same pattern. So stacking on the very last puddle to appear and then quickly moving into the safe areas once the others start to disappear is the easiest way to handle those sort of puddles. And almost every arena, if they don't end in a steep drop, is also going to be surrounded by a puddle of sorts that's going to kill you if you step or run into it. This is why I'm always saying stay out of the yuck. It's because I care. I'm looking out for you. This and this are universal stack markers. This is one of the most common markers that you're going to see across the entire expanse of the game, and it's very, very easy to handle. Which is also why I get so confused that in level 80 content, in endgame content, people still don't know how to handle this. Whenever you see these markers, you're going to want to stack with other party members, which means if you're the person who's marked, you also want to get close to your party so everyone can stack on you. That includes you, black mages. Your best bet is usually just to stand immediately behind the boss so all melee can get in and still DPS. And unless you're ranged off in La La Land, which you should never be to begin with, you should be able to easily stack as well. The only reason you ever want to avoid stacking for this is if you have a different indicator on you, like an overhead arrow or something of that sort. This could possibly kill you or wipe the party if you're targeted with a different attack, especially if it's an AoE. If there's multiple people marked with these stack markers, never stack them on top of each other. This is another very common mistake that I don't understand. You're going to want to split up and try to be sure the markers do not overlap so the party can split themselves between you to absorb the damage. On the flip side, there's this proximity marker, which requires the party to be as far away from the marked person as possible. Now, these attacks do really high damage, and the only way to lessen the amount of damage you take is to be as far away from that marked player as possible, which means if you're the person marked, you also need to move away from your party as they're moving away from you. There's another version of this that does not center itself around a player. So if you see this pulsing floor indicator, it means the exact same thing. It's just not targeted on an actual player. You're going to take damage with the amount depending on how close you are to it. So just like before, you want to be as far away as possible. Overhead pointers are part of many different mechanics, and over time you're going to just learn to recognize them and know exactly how to handle them in each fight. But there's a few key things that you can do with pointers to come out successful, most of the time. An arrow by itself will almost always mean the boss or the mob you're fighting has singled you out for an attack, and generally running away from both what's attacking you and your party members is going to be your best bet. This way, if you drop a puddle or you're being hit with an undodgeable AoE, no one else will be affected. Whenever you encounter a different or new pointer, this should be your default way of handling it. But there's exceptions to this rule, and the pointer itself will generally reflect that, and you will usually start recognizing these differences with experience. For instance, if you see this red triangle, you're going to want to stack with other players who are marked with the same red triangle to avoid taking damage or getting debuffed. This arrow, on the other hand, which indicates an attack called Earthshakers, requires you to move away from the party and the boss, just like any other pointers, but also required that you stay away from anyone else marked with the same indicator, because the boss is about to do a line AoE aimed directly at your face. So doubling up on this could be deadly to you or anyone caught in its path. Tethers, when by themselves, are another mechanic that will either do a steady stream of damage or place a debuff on you and can be dealt with a few different ways. If you're tethered to another player, you can either run away from or toward them to break that tether, which is almost always the goal. Generally, running away from the player you're tethered to is the best thing to try first because it's the most common way these are dealt with. And if that does not work, don't just stand there a mile apart, run toward that other player until you're right on top of them. One of these two will almost always break the tether, and if neither of those two break it, look around the arena. There should be something else there that's going to do the trick. Like in the fight with Ramu, you need to touch 3 of the floating lightning orbs to break the tether. Honestly, the best thing you can do when in doubt is just ask your party. Don't be shy. That's how you learn. If you're tethered to the boss, an ad, or just some random object in the arena, you're going to want to run away from it, run away from your party, and also point that tether away from your party, unless of course it's coupled with a stack indicator. Generally, these tethers cannot be broken, and instead mean an attack is incoming that's going to follow the tether, just like this one. Side note, don't confuse tethers with Dragon Sight, which happens quite often, especially with new players. A Dragoon can tether themselves to another player to buff both your damage and their damage. So if you're tethered to a Dragoon with this tether and you have this buff marker, that means you and the Dragoon are buffing each other's damage. So stay close to the Dragoon, you do not want to break the tether. Anytime a mechanic is coupled with arrows, like this one, that means an attack is coming that has a directional element. If the arrows slide themselves across the floor like this, that means the attack is going to push you across the arena. If they simply have an arrow in the indicator, that means the mechanic is going to move in that direction, so you're going to want to get out of the way. If you're marked and there's arrows that follow you around, like we have going on here, that means the mechanic is going to follow you around. Generally, this will come in the form of a series of explosions or puddles, so you're going to want to take these away from your party and keep running. But I think that does it for the basic of basic indicators to watch out for. And now, because why not, I'm going to let you in on a few of the less common ones. We're going to call this a teaser for future videos that I'm going to make. And we'll begin with this one. When the boss turns to face you and a long AoE indicator attaches itself to you and grows or shortens depending on your distance from the boss, this means a charge is incoming, and that charge cannot be dodged. This mechanic by itself will generally not do too much damage. That is usually reserved for what comes immediately after. Now, there are two ways of handling an undodgeable charge. Either run away from or run toward the boss. In general, and I know this sounds very counterintuitive, but you're going to want to run toward the boss. Now, that's because it's going to give your party ample time to dodge what's coming next. If you run away, the boss is usually going to turn around and do a wide area attack that will hit most people trying to reposition. There's, I think, one battle somewhere that requires you to run away from the boss, and I don't even remember which battle that is. So if you see this, run toward the boss by default. Polarity is an attack that's super easy to manage if you can remember two words. Opposites attract. So when this attack begins, you're going to be tethered to the boss or to another player, and either a plus or minus sign is going to appear above your head. If you are a plus and the person you're tethered to is a minus, after a short countdown, you're going to be pulled together because, say it with me, opposites attract. If you are both the same sign, you are then going to be pushed apart. Now, these indicators will almost always be coupled with another attack since they're being used by the boss to put you in line of whatever attack they have coming next in most cases. If you are the same sign and you're going to be pushed apart in general, running toward the middle of the arena is your best bet. This way you're not going to be pushed outside into the yuck and killed. And if you have opposite signs, you're going to want to place the middle of the tether in a safe zone so that neither of you are going to be pulled into a puddle or into another mechanic. These large ornate circles that have 1 to 4 smaller circles on the inside are known as summoning circles and require one person to stand on them for each of the small inner circles. If enough people stand in them, they lock, represented by this chain. And if not, then after a short duration, an ad is going to spawn. And these ads are generally stronger than your standard ad, so having multiple spawn could possibly create quite a few issues. It does take a bit of wordless coordination between party members, so if they appear, don't just stand in one, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for your group to come stand on your circle. Follow your fellow party members. You do not have enough time to play the "I require you to follow my lead because I am much more important, not the other way around" sort of game. Don't be that person. That person sucks. If the entire floor is covered in yuck, which usually takes the form of this smoky miasma or a sheet of ice, you want to stand completely still. Just stop where you are. The miasma usually indicates another attack is incoming, and if you move, you could have anything from a debuff placed on you to an ad tethering itself to you. Ice will do what ice does. It makes the floor slippery, and any movement is going to send you sliding across the room, possibly over the edge and to your death. It also prevents you from attacking as you slide around. If another mechanic goes out that requires you to dodge while ice is on the floor, you need to be sure that you're pointed in a safe direction. Otherwise, just don't move at all. These psychedelic dice are known as acceleration bombs and are always going to hit you really hard. Usually so much so that they're just going to flat out kill you. And if one of these dice starts rolling above your head, you need to stop everything that you're doing. Don't attack. Don't even auto attack. So put your weapon away if you have to. Do not move. Do not do anything. Don't even pan your camera. Once it counts down to 1, it's going to explode. And even the slightest movement, the weakest attack, or any input on your controls is likely going to mean your death. On the flip side, doing absolutely nothing is going to render this attack almost completely painless. Towers, or what we call towers, appear now and then in various battles. These indicators always have a small circle with a pole coming up out of the center, and after a short time, they're going to do one of two things. Either they're going to explode doing unavoidable damage, or they're going to explode and give everyone a debuff, sometimes both. Whenever you see one of these towers, you're going to want to stand in it. Standing on the tower will negate any damage or debuff they would otherwise do. Usually, it only takes one person per tower, so this should be very easy to cover them all. But I think that's all I have for now. This should, if anything, be a good primer on how to handle some of the more common mechanics. If you need more information on something in particular, or you have any suggestions for any future videos or anything else, feel free to message me in the comments. And while you're down there, be sure to follow me on Twitter, which is linked in the description, and subscribe for more. But with that, as always, it's been a hoot. Until next time, have fun.